God of the Bible a dominant ape? How did he evolve? What does he protect? Why do all apes, humans, and gods want the same thing? Why is God a war maker? Why does he want us to kneel to him? Why does he demand submission? How has he earned a fearsome reputation? How should we respond to this alpha god's religious violence and oppression? What's up, everybody? Arael Avinu here with Fully Deconverted, where we disenfranchise dogma. That's kind of the thing we do, right? And today is no different. But before we get started, I want to make sure that we observe Veterans Day weekend. So to all that have served in the military in the United States Armed Forces, we say thank you. Thank you for your service. All right, moving right along. Today we have Hector Garcia, the author of Alpha God, and I've got his book right here. All right. If you don't buy this book by the end of this interview, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you're gonna have to. And by the way, it's in the description. You can look at that. Alpha God: The Psychology of Religious Violence and Oppression. All right. Listen, I don't know if you can see this, but as I go through. All right, that's horrible, but it's nothing but notes from me. All right, we're going to bring him on in just a second, but before we do, I want to give everybody like a little intro about what his book is about, and then we're going to bring him on. All right, a short reading. Everybody hang with me for just a second, because this stuff, it's crazy incredible, all right? Everybody pay attention. All great ape species have male dominance hierarchies, and there is a relative lack of female dominance hierarchies among the great apes. Males, with the notable exception of bonobos, I probably said that wrong, typically, I'm turn the page here, it's like, you remember when we got read to in library, when we were all, okay, all right, moving right along. Let's see here. Typically dominate females. Dominant status is often associated with greater male violence. Dominant chimpanzees, for example, show agonistic displays more often, start aggressive interactions more often, escalate aggression more often, and win aggressive interactions more often than their lower-ranking counterparts. Humans, like other primates, for the greater part, live in hierarchical societies. Having trouble with that word? Here we go. While the degree to which human societies are rank stratified varies across cultures, there is a rank structure, even in relatively more egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies. Rank has important implications for behavior. All right, that's a little intro to his book. And now, let's bring him on. Hector, how you doing, my friend?
Hey, doing well.
All right. Glad to have you on. Your book is incredible. As I read through it, it's nothing but notes for me. Now, as someone who deconverted just about a year ago, this material is stuff like what I eat up. So, Hector, will you introduce yourself to our audience and just say a little bit about what you got going on?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialize in treating PTSD among combat veterans. Is something I've been doing for the past 14 years. I'm also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. Very interested in the evolutionary sciences. I like what they can explain. This book, Alpha God, is my first book. I've actually got another book coming out February 5th called Sex, Power, and Partisanship: How Evolutionary Science Makes Sense of Our Political Division. So it's a field that I love. It's a field that I love to talk about. So I'm really delighted to be here with you, because I've been watching what you've been doing and your amazing production team. I think it's a good mission, and you guys are just crafting it in such an artistic way. It's good. So happy to be here.
Yeah, great. Happy to have a person like you on board as well. I think your content is going to go a long way with our audience, and it's definitely gone a long way with me. So let's kick this off. In the opening of your first chapter Enter God, the Dominant Ape, you kind of illustrate two distinct visions of God. Can you tell us a little bit about how there is two visions, or what those two visions are?
Yeah, there are many visions of God, but I think
Yeah.
what you're talking about is how, for so many people, this notion of God, God is a vision of hope, of love. And people commune around this notion of God and create a sense of compassion and charity amongst one another. But there's also a vision of God that's just as real insofar as religious practitioners and believers, believe in it, and as far as the scripture is written that way, and that's a God that's incredibly violent, that rains fury on his enemies, I think was one of the terms that I use. Starts religious war, conquest, inquisitions, witch hunts. Maybe influences men to steer buildings into airplanes, things like that. And we have to understand this God. And I guess before we talk about the meat of this, like why do we want to understand that?
Mm.
The level of suffering alone, but also, as a non-believer, I have a deep appreciation for the costs of religious violence and oppression.
Right.
Because I can say with almost total certainty that those who are killed at the hands of religious violence, they come to an existential end. Mm-hmm. They don't get a second chance at some better place. And the same for people who suffer through oppression at the hands of religion. Their fortunes don't get rearranged in the afterlife. So for me, that amplifies the moral imperative that we have to understand where it all comes from and to use the best tools that we have at our disposal to do that. And I like the evolutionary sciences, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, behavior genetics, biological anthropology, for what they're able to tell us. They're able to tell us the ultimate causes of our behavior, of our likes, our dislikes, our passions, where it comes from, what the evolved purpose is. And that's what I find so fascinating about that.
Well, in spite of you not being a believer, we will have believing or theist audience members who might be tempted to kind of shut you out. And, because you're not a believer and you're writing about this. And some people, Hector, just don't approve of science. And that's just the way it is. And that's cool because to them it's stigmatized a bit. And I was a believer and I get that. Some denominations are anti-science and that whole sort of thing. But we're going to push past that. And I'm going to say that I think even theists and Christians have that same moral imperative that you just brought up to kind of discover what their religion is all about. So I'm going to read a passage here. It's short, guys, really short, but it's super interesting. And I'm going to ask you why you included this in your book. If oxen and horses and lions had hands and were able to draw with their hands and do the same things as men, horses would draw the shapes of gods to look like horses, and oxen to look like oxen, and each would have made the gods' bodies to have the same shapes as they themselves had. And Xenophanes, excuse me, that's a quote by Xenophanes, if I'm saying that name correctly. In the 6th century? No, that's BCE.
Yeah. All
right, so going back.
Yeah.
Why did you include that? Why is that relevant?
Oh, I think that's brilliant. The ancient Greeks were so precocious in so many ways. And to point out that, the book is in this book, I make the case that, God is created in the image of man. I'm certainly not the first one to come up with this idea. The Greeks were onto this, as you can see in that amazing quote by Xenophanes. But the point is, when we look into the ether and we see faces in the clouds, and we see gods in the clouds, we're seeing ourselves, and we bring with us an ancient primate legacy, an evolved psychology that goes back millions of years into our projections. So that's why it's so important to understand religious violence and oppression. We have to look at the model, and that is us. And we are primates. That's who we are. We are animals. We're primates. And if we can reconcile ourselves with that fact, perhaps we can find a way to avoid our darkest primal impulses, especially those that impel us to, cause harm to one another. So that was the point.
Yeah, so that was the thesis that I picked up on in your book, is that
Yeah.
you argue here that God was created in the image of man. Is that fair to say that that's your thesis?
That's fair to say.
All
That's
right,
certainly
great.
part of it.
Right, because I underlined it and I put it there. So if there's,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
all right, and you're drawing that off of the fact that we do have this primate history, that there is this evolution to humanity and humankind and all that. So I'm not going to belabor that fact. We're going to move forward with how you build on that thesis, and we're going to take it for granted. And I say that just because some people, I've been discussing with a lot of people recently that evolution is just lie and science is lies. And it amazes me to hear that. I'm like, bro, how are you even talking to me right now if you're anti-science, but you're endorsing its applications through the technology that you're using to communicate with me now? Anyways. Okay, you make a statement in here, and this is what started opening my mind. You made a statement that there are ancient underlying motivations for violence and oppression, and they molded the process of natural selection. And this is easily evidenced in our living non-human primates, our closest living relatives. So when we're talking about violence, and by the way, the subtitle of your book is Religious Violence and Oppression, just to remind everybody, is violence evidently necessary for us to acquire food, sex, and territory? Is it evidently necessary for our species to do that?
Well, before I answer that, I think there's a caveat or two that need to be voiced, and
Sure.
one is that whenever we study the evolutionary sciences, we have to be careful not to commit what's called the naturalistic fallacy.
Okay.
That just because something may be arrived at biologically or through genetic means, that doesn't mean that it's moral. That doesn't mean that it's desired. That doesn't mean that it's inevitable. There are so many ways that we can outsmart our own biology, from eyeglasses to sunblock to entire fields like medicine. Just because we have a predisposition for something doesn't mean that it's inevitable. And I also think that, the less we know about our evolved psychology, the less we're going to be able to resist those impulses when they arise. So it gives us greater freedom to make better choices, including those that involve violence and oppression. I think, so to your question, is it necessary? I think in our ancestral past, it was far more necessary than it is today.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things that I think we need to understand when we look at all these evolved adaptations that we have. They served a purpose for a far different environment. And the way that we're evolving now, we have the technological capacity to erase starvation from the human experience. We can feed everybody. We don't need to raid the neighboring tribe for their goods or for their wealth or for their territory. We don't need to do that anymore. But we house these Stone Age minds that may not be as adapted as we would like as we integrate into this interconnected world that we're moving towards. So is it necessary? Not anymore. Not in the way it once was. And that's an important question.
And the reason why I asked that question is because that you kind of build from there a lot of habits that we've had as humanity, and how the religious hierarchies start playing a major role in that. It's basically all about resources that we're all commonly after. So I wanted to ask that question just so we kind of have a baseline of, did we do that or didn't we? And was it necessary with our species? Could we have gone a different direction? Because some theists might listen to this, Hector, and they might say, you know what, we could have went another direction, and you can't use that as supportive evidence, against, let's say, God actually really existing, rather than it just being a human invention, as your thesis kind of states. So, okay, we'll build from there. While the God of the Abrahamic religions has powers that humans do not, he remains unnecessarily preoccupied with what are ultimately very human and very ape-like concerns. Isn't that, if I was a theist, I would argue those concerns are there because his subjects are ape-like. What do you have to say about that?
I'd say his subjects are ape-like.
Why would he concern himself with anything else? Why would he try to give something ultra revelatory to us if it's outside of our nature to be able to even employ any of those revelations?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, listen. So, because God concepts are central to almost all of the world's religions, if we want to understand religious violence, we have to look to this notion of God, and like you mentioned, the God of the Abrahamic faiths, as well as the face of many religious traditions, is usually described with all the omnis, omnipotent, ultimate power, right? Omnipresent, present everywhere, never dies, doesn't have a physical form like you and me. But this God, not only his subjects, but this God is described as being immensely interested in territory and submission displays and controlling sexuality, all of which have meaning for our survival and reproduction as mortal biological beings who need to extract resources from the environment to survive, who need to reproduce or be no more. Yet, this God, as he is described as a male. Why would this God be described as a male? Does he have genitalia? What would he use him for if he doesn't ever need to reproduce? This God is described as having immense interest in all of these things. Send me your burnt offering, sacrifice your food to me, sacrifice sex to me, take vows of chastity. Let me be your only, your sexual primacy. I want to own it. Why would an all-powerful God want this if he was not based on us? That's the huge contradiction in all this. And the thing about our evolved psychology is it's mostly under the radar of conscious awareness, or what's known as instinct blindness. I mean, the older the instinct, typically, the less available it is to conscious awareness. But when you pull these things to the surface and start examining them, it's like, well, that actually makes no sense from an omnipotent being. We've projected all this stuff onto the hierarchy, and there's evidence to suggest that, hey, there's a lot of cognitive neural architecture that is designed specifically to understand the dominance hierarchy. There are certain neurons in other primates who seem to be specialized to understand dominance. So we come equipped with this hardware. So one way to understand that is that zoologists have talked about, like, why have we been able to domesticate certain animals like horses and dogs, but not zebras or antelope? And that's because these animals have a dominance hierarchy, and their brains evolved in a way to navigate those dominance hierarchies. So when humans come onto the scene, they step in. They step in for the alphas of their pack or their herd. Yeah. And it's like a lockstep. Well, the religions that really have taken off and comprise most of the world's believers are the ones that co-opted this evolved psychology, the rules of the dominance hierarchy, ceding control up the chain of command, having a God that is large and fearsome and male and protecting and jealous. Well, primates understand this. But the point of all this is that those projections are the ones that most commonly result in religious violence and oppression, just like our primate forebears. So, but of course, gods don't commit religious violence. Men do, and they cite their relationship with their gods as inspiration. Yeah. And that's the bottom line.
All right, Hector, put a pause on that right there. I want to go over to the live feed and say hello to all our valued audience members. What's going on, Kevin? What's going on, BJ Price? I was reading through a chat earlier, BJ Price, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how your name is said. I seen that in a video a couple of weeks ago, so I was calling you Beej. Now I think it's BJ Price. Let me know if I'm right on that. Hey, Marty Galbraith. Hey, what's going on, my friend? What's up, Morte? How you doing? Zach Gumfer, how you doing? Nick, Katie Dodson, Violet Joy, Logic Beat Speculation. I love seeing all you guys in there. What's going on, everybody? What is this? Reverend Tacos Guidos Meneneros. All right, I hope I got that. Brian Stevens, what's going on, everybody? Let me see if I can pick out a quote here. All of the same instincts. Morte says, all of the same instincts are in use in the way we worshipped kings. All right, I took that out of context. I don't know what all that was saying. We'll go back over there. Hey, how you guys doing, everybody? Hector, back over to you, my friend. All right. You talk about preferential access in these dominance hierarchies. And you say rank typically confers rewards, which for males includes preferential access to resources such as food, females, and territory. What rewards or preferential access to resources do you observe in religion?
All those same things. What religious conquest was not concerned with territory? I mean, you look in the Old Testament, the God of Abraham is saying, I am going to secure for you by leading you into battle this territory demarcated here, 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 and here, and here, and I'm going to take it for you. I'm going to lead you into battle. All the resources therein. The God of Abraham told Moses, according to Scripture, go into the rival tribes, slaughter all the men, and take the women as sexual slaves. So this is all about mate competition. Other primate species engage in this stuff. A good example is chimpanzees. So what chimpanzees will do, and you should look this stuff up online if you ever get a chance to see how they form war parties. It is eerily human-like. They form these all-male groups. They go chillingly silent, and they start patrolling the jungles. It looks like men patrolling the jungles during the Vietnam War. Single file, quiet. So they patrol the periphery of their territory. If they find a lone male, or if they find a smaller group, they attack, and they attack viciously, biting, kicking, tearing off flesh, biting off genitalia. So what has been seen over and over and over is that the end result is eventually when they engage in enough of these campaigns, they take over the rival chimpanzee troops' territory. All the things in there that they need for survival: fruit trees, colobus monkeys, which is their favorite prey animal, and they absorb that troop's females. So their evolutionary fitness, how many of their genes get projected onto the next generation, increases with these wars. So, men do this as well, and they do it in following these evolutionary imperatives in such a striking way. It's undeniable. And the God of the Abrahamic faith is like all the other religious traditions is really describing these. He says, I want this for you. I want this for myself. I want it for you. I want you to go do this.
But that's not really God talking to them from your perspective. That's us talking to ourselves and saying, you know what? Same old game, guys. We're going to go out there. We're going to mark our territory. We're going to kick ass and maybe take names and that sort of thing. All right, okay, everybody break. That's from your perspective, right? Like it's just
sure. It's what we're doing. And look, that's I've heard some of the die-hard free-thinking atheist type saying, look, the root of all evil is religion, and the root of all violence is religion. And I don't think that's the case. Now, would the world be better off without religion? That's an empirical question. Yeah. We're actually starting to be able to answer that. So we can talk about that. But and the answer seems to be the healthiest societies tend to be the least religious societies. But really, the ultimate cause is our biology. Religion is just
I love this different
platform.
narrative that you're going down. You're right, Hector. You're right. A lot in the atheist community and agnostic or secular community on the activism side usually says religion needs to go. Religion is poison and stuff like that. But I love this. All right, continue on, Hector. What's the real problem?
religion is the platform on which all of these things get enacted, and if or politics or an economic structure, but when those religions are designed with these biological imperatives so embedded, it's just a direct channel to violence and oppression. Now, I think that religion presents some unique dangers and unique challenges, and one is the sense of religious ecstasy that people experience when they commit religious violence. If you really want to see what that's like, brace yourself and watch one of those snuff films that ISIS or Al-Qaeda put on YouTube where they behead people who they see as infidels, journalists, things like that, and scream God is great with this. It's revoltingly palpable how that infuses that crime with the sense of ecstasy. But also religions are very good about forbidding questioning. So oppression, violence, you don't question that because you have things like papal infallibility or heresy or all these other ideas that you don't question the power structure. And so all these inhumanities go unexamined because you're not allowed to question them. Now, that too you see in secular hierarchies as well. I mean, imagine questioning the Communist Party during Stalinist Russia. People who did that, they were erased from the face of the earth. But again, if you really believe that questioning, a male leader is tantamount to questioning the most powerful being in the entire universe, you're not going to do it.
Yeah,
if you're a believer, that's terrifying to you.
Absolutely.
So it adds an extra layer of fear, and I think that encourages people to shut up and just accept inhumanity and inequality and oppression.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
That's what makes religion special.
Yeah, and that is a characteristic, by the way, of a lot of people in religion. When I was in religion, that was it. Like, you might be curious, but when it comes to the point of kind of pressing the issue, there was this kind of not truly unspoken, but kind of this behavioral gesture of, we can speculate all we want, but really, if we keep speculating, what we're really doing is we're tempting God to try to reveal that to us, or we're asking God to reveal something to us that He has decided to withhold. And then it becomes, we're in a dominance hierarchy as you frame it, and don't press the authority that way. That's not the way it was arranged, and that's not the way you press the issue. I want to go over to Trevor Lunn over in the live chat. Said something that I really like. Interesting that the biblical narrative starts with all the resources accessible, and then humanity is ejected from it. What do you think about that, Hector?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I write about this in the book. For example, I mean, if you understand male mate competition and competition for resources among other animals, what I quote a lot is William James's idea that in order to understand these patterns that are so intuitive, we have to make the natural seem strange. I love that, because it means you have to kind of step out of the normative way of looking at things, the patterned way of looking at things, and make what we do so naturally seem strange, and ask ourselves, well, why do we do that? So once you start to understand, once you can take an outsider's perspective, like the central narrative of Christianity, this idea of the Garden of Eden, and you have this young upstart male that comes onto the scene and challenges God's authority by wanting to eat from the tree of life and gain knowledge of what it's like to be a god. That fruit is variously represents sex or actual food. Well, dominant primates always claim preferential access to that. So you're violating that. You're violating the rules of the hierarchy. So you're ejected. You're ejected from that territory. A Martian anthropologist would have no problem understanding where this all comes from. For a lot of us, it's too close, so it's hard to see it unless you can kind of detach yourself and say, look, these patterns, we see these in other animals. We see these in ourselves.
Yeah, it is absolutely too close, Hector, for a lot of us. Can I ask you, were you ever a believer or a theist at any point?
I was never a theist at any point. My dad was an atheist, and so he still is an atheist, and he was a neo-Darwinist. I just really loved that science, and so I was never raised atheist. I do come from a giant Mexican American family. I don't even know how many cousins I have, probably like 70. They're all Catholic,
Yeah,
except
yeah.
for my family. So I wasn't raised that way.
Yeah, the reason why I ask you that is just to have a reference on you. But
Yeah,
man, a lot of us that were raised Christian for 20,
yeah,
30, 50 years, it is too close. I mean, you would not think of dominance hierarchies or ape-like parallels, even though since we're all apes. You just wouldn't think about
yeah.
that when you read the Garden of Eden. You think in reverse. You're like, how do we get back to that? How are we allowed to get back to that? How do we? That's the only thing your mind really goes to. But reading through your book, that's why. Let me try to put this up to my camera again. That's going to be out of focus, but it is every page is notes, underlines, and that have at least two questions down at the bottom.
Yeah.
So guys, get this book if this is new material for you, because it's to me it's very dense. It's hard to go through without start breaking it up. Hector, human potential is so vast that we may have limited ourselves by the gods we created. How would creating a god limit our potential?
Oh boy, what about a God that doesn't want you to ask questions? For one, asking questions is considered heresy, is considered displeasing to Allah. You don't ask questions. I mean, even here in Texas where I live, we're having these fights with the Texas State Board of Education that doesn't want to, that wants to inject false uncertainty into evolution by natural selection. That even wants to take that even tried to take Thomas Jefferson out of history books because of his skepticism about religion. We're doing a disservice to humanity by trying to withhold this science for all that it has to reveal about who we are, all the things that are great about us, and all the things that tear civilizations down time and time and time again. As one example, or religions that encourage us to think tribalistically. Anybody on the outside is an enemy, and you don't trust them. So how many wars have been fought because of that? How many people have been killed? How many civilizations have been destroyed? So you design a god to be a warlord, and you're going to get that from his followers. And indeed, in the Old Testament says, the Lord is a man of war. It's pretty explicit about that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying the followers of a particular god take on the personality of that god.
Sure. Yeah, especially when that god mandates certain things, like you see in Islam. That's the thing about Islam. It's way more prescriptive violence. The Bible has been described as descriptive. There's these stories of rape and infanticide and just a genocide, torture. Whereas Islam is usually more like, go out and do this. If people try to leave Islam, you do this to them. You murder them. You chop off their fingertips. You boil them in water. We may emulate the gods that we create, but in a sense, but we're really just enacting our own drives.
Yeah, and then it follows whoever the creators are, or the enforcers are, or the leaders are. Which when you think about it, generation to generation, people aren't just okay. It's my turn to take the top position. All right, yep, all this is fake, but I will make sure that it's all enforced and distributed to everybody below me. Like, that's not how the succession of religion occurs. You have people brought up into it from childhood on, or that convert into it, and they buy it. They buy it. And like you said earlier, Hector, people may be too close to this process to recognize that it is indoctrination, because when they're being brought into it, they're being brought into it often by those they love, and in which they already have secular hierarchies in place. And when that secular hierarchy takes on the tone of a religious one, it's an easy translation from "I know my place, now I just adopt new practices." Now I say, instead of having a good day, God blessed me this day. And those are easily transferred over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I have a lot of compassion, if I may just say. I have a lot of
Yeah.
compassion for those people because, like, where do you go for alternate perspectives?
Right, right,
If
right,
that's
right.
all you've ever known, and this shared delusion, like everybody agrees not to counter that, and if you counter that,
Yeah,
you're going against the tribe. Where are you going to go for alternate perspectives? One of the
right.
biggest fears that we have, which is the source of so much of our political turmoil today, so much of the religious conflicts that we've seen across the ages, is that fear of being ejected from the tribe it's huge.
Yeah.
In the days of our ancestors, that would have been a death sentence. So
That was.
today,
Go ahead,
please.
Hector. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was
No,
gonna.
today we have this fear, and and even where we don't literally need our social circle to survive the day, the thought of going against group norms is so terrifying. That's why a lot of people are afraid to leave the church.
Yeah,
Um,
you are absolutely right. Everybody that I've seen on the edge, that's the fear. Their rhetoric, their dialogue that you might have with them, and when you can tell people don't fully buy it, but their families are in
yeah,
church or they grew up in church, it always kind of borders and teeters on that spot where, I've been going there for 15 years, or my
yeah,
family serves, or I totally disagree with this and this doesn't rub me the right way, but that's not what it's all about. We get this teeter
yeah.
thing where we don't want to break those ties with the community. A God, let me see here. It certainly doesn't resemble any of the obvious simplistic and species-centric characterizations that have been widely proposed throughout the history of religion. All right, I took that out of context right there. I didn't get the whole idea. You said your own opinion is that if there is a higher power, it certainly doesn't resemble any of the obvious simplistic and species-centric characterizations that have been widely proposed throughout the history of religion. Sure, Hector. But a God wouldn't resemble us. Don't we resemble him? Isn't that the way it would go?
Boy, maybe, but wow, what a terrible model. If you have unlimited power, you know, you create. Why would you look like a naked ape? I mean, it just seems kind of silly when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that argument made, but what can you say? Why would God look like a human being? Why would he be so fallible? Why would he be so jealous? Why would it
Yeah.
be so vindictive? Why would it be so narcissistic, afraid of usurpation? Why it just doesn't reconcile with all of these central ideas that you see, all the omnis. It's about us. You know,
Yeah. I'm
we,
so
we, we
tempted to.
look into the world based on our limited hardware. I mean, that's just like you know, just like our pets. Our dogs look at us as like, wow, this is just he's just another dominant male of the pack, or a dominant female, a dominant member of the pack. We're bound by our own hardware.
Yeah. I was gonna say I'm tempted to throw out the fact that some theists, and I also subscribe to this idea that humanity in our human form, whatever, we are the pinnacle of creation. Like there's nothing greater, higher. This is what we always will be when God glorifies us and that whole sort of thing. So to draw scrutiny to some of those parts about us that could have otherwise either been improved or just be better is well, I mean, they're deserving of the scrutiny, but that is the way God had meant it to be designed. Anyways, I don't really want to play into that. We'll let that stand right there. Is dominance a moral issue or a feature which society employs? Kind of two different areas right here. Is dominance a moral issue, or is it just a feature which we employ?
Did that come from my book? I don't remember that part.
That's a question I
Was that
have.
you?
You want me to read a little
Oh, okay.
excerpt to put this into context? In
Yeah,
dominance,
yeah, because
yeah,
that's an important question, and I want to make sure I'm answering it,
in
doing it
dominance
justice. So,
hierarchies, status is
yeah.
reinforced with aggression and fear, and the lower
Mhm.
ranking typically avert eye contact, yield space, groom their superiors, and make other submissive gestures.
Right.
And in saying that, I can't help but always recall, how do we treat celebrities? How do we treat the pastor? How do we treat the president? How do we treat, like it's obvious, Hector. When I read your book, like I'm like, damn, we do all of that. Like these are so, like, of
Oh,
course that's all there, but I don't want to draw a false correlation.
right.
So
But there is a correlation. It's a real I mean, somebody somebody watching said something about we do the same thing to kings. We do.
yeah.
We do.
So
We kneel before our kings. We
yeah,
cede resources up to our kings. We don't question the kings, and for all the things that could happen to us if we did so. And in Saudi Arabia, if you insult the royal family, you can do hard prison time still to this day.
yeah,
So men are walking gods on earth. They have been by citing this alliance. So is
yeah.
it a moral issue? It is a moral issue insofar as that the dominance hierarchy can create suffering in those lower on the hierarchy,
Okay.
and so often does. So
Where do we find these dominant characteristics in the Bible? Oh, yeah, you've already mentioned a few, but
every page, every I mean,
like
it's
if we
just
were to draw, because you said things like avert eye contact, yield
oh yeah,
space, groom our superiors, make other submissive gestures. Let me tell you where my mind goes.
okay,
Avert eye contact. So when people see an angel or God, what do? They fall down to the ground, right? And they don't look. You have these instances where there's fear and dread that come on people, right?
right,
And yield space. Moses takes off his sandals. He observes a sacred
yeah,
space. God has a throne room where only certain angels are allowed to occupy. And obviously, we don't coexist. We were expelled from any kind of presence
sure,
or cohabitation with God. And they groom their superiors. Mary washed Jesus' feet with perfume. That's kind of along the same lines, and they make other submissive gestures. Now, I think we do a lot of the same stuff with pastors, if we're just to bring it home.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, just look at the Vatican if you want to talk about the pinnacle of preserved territory that other people are not allowed to go. Praying, you close your eyes when you pray. You avert your eyes. You shrink down.
Yeah.
You make yourself look smaller. Absolutely.
So
So
should we
I'm
be looking
delighted
for?
to see
Yeah.
the connections you're making, because it does extend far beyond religious worship, but it absolutely is embedded in religion, especially the Abrahamic faiths. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I challenge our audience, if anybody in the live stream right now wants to make a comment about the thing that they notice most out of all those examples, go for it. I would love to see it. Kind of along the same lines, how do leaders in the religious communities demonstrate intimidation, territorial acquisition, sexual control, and violence? That's a little suggestive there, but those, I'll just ask you that.
oh boy, I think I'll answer with the question that I got asked a lot. I'm fairly new to the atheist secular humanist community. I didn't even know this community existed until I wrote this book, and I started getting calls from people for radio shows and stuff like that. And I was like, wow,
Yeah,
that's the kind of I really admire this community for their fearlessness. Let me just say that before we even say anything else,
yeah,
because you have to stand alone so much.
yeah,
You have to look your own mortality in the face without flinching, and question your own thoughts and your own perceptions, and update them if they're not accurate. That takes a lot of guts.
yeah,
So I didn't know too much about this community when I first wrote this book, but I kept being asked, well, how did you come up with this idea? And it had been simmering for so long, I hadn't even thought about it. But what I keep coming back to over and over is where I grew up. You know, I grew up in El Paso, Texas, in the desert Southwest. It's on the Mexico-Texas, New Mexico border. And the history of religious conquest is so deep in that part of the world. So I think you may have heard this on some of my other podcasts, but I'm what you call mestizo, which means a mix of native and Spanish heritage. And how that mix came about was all about religious conquest. If you come outside the El Paso International Airport, you'll see the largest equestrian statue in the world. And it's of this conquistador rearing back on his horse, clad in armor, that stood for somebody, that represents somebody that I write about in the book. This conquistador named Juan de Oñate is this guy who just slaughtered his way across the Southwest. And one of the things that he did was he went into the pueblos in Acoma, New Mexico, and he gathered up all the fighting-aged men and hacked off one of their feet. And you can imagine what he did to the women there, you know. But this was all done in the name of Christ, in the name of the church and crown. And you know, there are records of some of the things that he proclaimed, that he said as he was doing this. I'm claiming this in the name of Christ. I'm claiming all the minerals, all the ores, all the people, everything in the name of Christ. But what happened across Latin America and across all religious conquest is like, my God is the dominant God. He's more powerful than your gods.
Right.
So you bow down to him, kneel before this God. But, you know, I have this special alliance with him, so I represent him. So you kneel down before me. So, you know, the line between the most powerful male in the universe and the men who represented him on earth was intentionally obfuscated, right? It was made blurry. So that's how it happens. And, you know, and that's just, I'm trying to put it in the most simple, obvious way that it happens, but that's not just unique to my own cultural history. For so much of our human history, there's been conquests. I mean, we were a warlike species for so long. For a certain swath of our history, all conquests were religious conquests. So everybody probably has this history in their DNA and so at some point. So that's how it happens. You know, I'm claiming all this stuff for my God, but give them to me. I'll take care of it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way it's been.
How different would biblical stories be if dominance wasn't a theme?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe look at Buddhism or something like that. You know, but even within Buddhism, I mean, the last chapter I talk about how men co-opt, you know, Buddhism and have these themes of dominance and territorial gain, and you know, Buddhism is no exception. You know, maybe it would look like Buddhism. The question is, would it have been so successful in you know, in conquest, in conquering the world? I mean, most of the world's believers in the world, billions of people, worship a God that whose whole dogma was based on conquest. So, you know, would the pacifist religions even survive that?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm gonna try to get through this in the time that we got. You bring up Robert Wright. In your book. I want to ask you what are his contributions, but can you just tell our audience a little bit about who Robert Wright is and why you cite him when you talk about, kind of his opinion that you take and put over here in the book. Tell us about Robert Wright.
Well, he's produced some great work in many different areas. I think what I liked about him for this book was his book, The Evolution of God, which is just the history of how did we go from hunter-gatherers to monotheism in the Middle East. So there are a lot of people who wrote that history. I favored his because it's so clear. It's
Yeah.
so urbane. He's so urbane in his thinking, and I cite a lot of that. How we went from these elemental spirits like wind spirits, water spirits, to a pantheon of gods. Where there is one dominant member, and acting like dominant men always act, seeking territory, seeking mates, seeking sexual primacy, seeking deference. And
So why, Hector, why is that evolution of how gods evolve? Why is that important? One question I want to ask you is, have all gods evolved that way? If you were to look at all societies, did all gods kind of, considering the influence, go from elemental spirits to your high gods? I'll just read the succession real quick, just so our audience has it. Elemental spirits, if you're talking about the succession of gods, natural phenomena controlled by supernatural beings, organic spirits, ancestral spirits, and high gods. So you kind of have this ladder, and at each rung there's an evolutionary step in which power kind of either becomes more obvious or consolidated until you get to the high omni gods. Why should we take notice of that?
I think the main reason is because of its utility in battle and conquest. When you have a society where multiple tribes are worshiping different gods, there's more chance for dissent. Just like multiple tribes worshiping a single dominant leader. The best way to consolidate power is to create a monotheistic God that everybody worships the same being. Everybody follows that same being into battle. There's no factions weakening the force of a nation.
Right.
And in biblical times, it was an incredibly violent, terrible time to live. I mean, people got hacked to pieces regularly, and the only thing stopping a group from slaughtering the rival tribe and stealing all their women, all their goods, was their ability to do so. So there was a need to do this. There was a need to consolidate power.
Yeah.
And that's where this monotheistic God arose.
And in your book, you kind of describe that a bit as you have, but I'll take that just a little bit further. And I'll use the analogy of going to prison. If you go to prison, and we're talking about Israel, you're Israel, you go to prison, you got to join with Gang A or Gang B. Gang A might be Egypt, Gang B might be Assyria, right? And you're like, damn, who do I choose? Because I'm right stuck in the middle of them, and we're not as powerful as they are. We're going to get beat up, and that's it. Like we could end things right here. So what you have to do is, for Israel, was say, listen, we got to cut out all these different gods, idols, and all this other stuff. And you'll see this in the Old Testament books. And we have to consolidate. We have to go back to this one God. We have to consolidate power right here. We have to be unified so that we can have strong defenses, and that so we can put up a defense-worthy front, basically.
Sure.
And that's kind of like going to prison, right? You got to be like, listen, I can't just do it on my own. I've got to go where the power is. Hope I did some of that.
And in a savage environment like that, you have to ally yourselves with those with power. That was clearly the case in the Middle East. That history, which led to monotheism, it was a violent history.
Yeah, and so that's what kind of helped progress monotheism and consolidate power, and now we have the religions we have today who are in power because it was necessary for their time for survival. Am I correct, in your opinion? Absolutely.
The bigger question is, how much utility does this approach have today?
Right.
As we form this globalistic union with all these other nations, and we're connected economically, technologically, culturally, how much does it serve us to have religions based on a tribe of the Bronze Era, where you identify the outsider, and demonize the outsider, and are based on acquiring territory, and killing people for apostasy, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think it serves us anymore.
All right, I'm gonna skip over a few questions, Hector, because I got too much, and we're almost at time. It's speaking about what you just said.
Yeah.
Is the condemning of opposing views or ideology, like what we find in religion, an example of possessive behavior characteristic of primates? Again, I'm trying to draw the correlation in how you're writing with humanity, our religion, and the normal behaviors of primates.
So sure, because usually, can you repeat that question? Because you're talking
Yeah.
about information, right? You're
Yeah.
talking about like
So when we condemn the other
controlling how
person,
people think.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. When we do that, are we demonstrating the possessive behavior that is characteristic of primates?
Yeah, condemn the other person like the other tribe, the other group. Is that
Yeah.
what you mean? Because really, yes, yeah, that's what chimpanzee groups do. They, at least the robust chimpanzee, it really, there's not a lot of out-group cooperation. Chimpanzees are run by, they're male dominated. They're usually highly related males because they don't immigrate. So you have these groups of highly genetically related males who are prone to forming strong alliances and taking risks in battle with one another because they share genes. So yeah, and so demonizing the outside groups, so any male that's found wandering away from its troop, savagely beaten or killed. So yeah, that comes from a very ancient place, and we have that in our DNA. Whether we can overcome that, I don't know. But this also gets mapped onto our political psychology as well, because when you look at the natural curve, not to open this whole discussion, but at least it's worth a mention here. When you look at our political orientations, they fall on a natural curve. So people are, at the one end, people are highly liberal. Most people are somewhere in between. And on the other end, people are highly conservative. Well, highly conservative people also tend to be very groupish, very tribalistic. That's one very clear facet of our political psychology. And be more xenophobic, be more afraid of the outside tribe, be more insular, like my tribe. And that has had implications for our survival across all our history.
Hector, do you have a strong history of participating in church worship experiences or services?
No, not really. The only religious affiliation I had was Native American church, and it's church, I say in quotations, and because I think it's a kind of a religious movement, but kind of not. Kind of the religious part was camouflage. So I don't know how much you want me to get into that now, but I could talk about that history at length.
Not very much. The reason why I asked you that question is, if I think you would receive such a strong sense of affirmation and validation in your own insights, because almost every worship experience you go to, especially if they are tending toward the conservative spectrum of their faith-based belief system, they do kind of demean the outsiders. Like, oh, those people who dress this way, don't be like them. All the people who have promiscuous sex or premarital sex or extramarital sex, oh, don't be like them. Don't be like these people.
Or drink coffee or drink alcohol or whatever.
Yeah. And all these things. And then you have Paul in the New Testament. I think it's Paul. It's either Paul or Peter. I think it's Paul who says, don't even show a hint of these things. And there specifically, I believe the emphasis was on sexual immorality. So you have this theme that is so strong, and it just has a direct correlation, parallel correlation with everything that you're talking about right here. And if these are primate instincts, wow, what a mind blower if we're going to really properly analyze who we are, how we behave, and why do we behave that way. Hey, maybe it's not because God ordained these things. Maybe it's because this has been our nature up to this point. And at least maybe if we're a little bit more aware of it, we might exercise a bit more control over it, or at least in who we're selective with, who we tribally identify with, right?
Yeah. We have so many blinders. We're blinded to our tribalistic impulses, and the need to belong to the group blinds us to so many things. Just look,
Yeah.
I mean, think of how evangelicals, how in the world they could, Trump could get 80% of their vote. It's not because he embraces Christian values in any way. It's because he speaks the language of the tribe.
Exactly.
He said, Christians will have power if I'm elected.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you're right. If we don't understand where this all comes from, we're going to be more prone to just enacting our darkest, basest impulses without consideration.
Yeah.
So I would argue, and I do in this book, that look, evolutionary science gives us greater freedom. It gives the freedom to choose, to pause before we act.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the empowering feeling I got when I was reading through your book. I don't know if that's unique to a lot of people, but for someone who was indoctrinated and heavily, mightily believed in these things, just to have my eyes opened a little bit more about the evolutionary sciences and the way you kind of demonstrate the data in the first chapter of your book makes me think like, wow, like just knowing it or being aware of it gives you that much more sense of power over your own self. Even as you close out your chapter, Hector, something stood out to me. You were talking about how sometimes in the New Testament, the Israelites were ordered to burn down cities. You burn down a city, just burn it to the ground, and it's all kind of there for God, never to be rebuilt. And you cite Deuteronomy chapter 13, 15 through 16. And then we go to another example of where King Zedekiah's son is killed in front of him by one of his enemies. And I drew a correlation there. I'm like, why are we stamping out the fact that, one, either somebody existed, or two, the possibility of progeny there, the possibility of legacy? Can you help me? I don't know if you meant that when you were writing this, but can you go in a little bit, because that stood out to me. Why do we burn cities to the ground and be like, never again will anything be rebuilt here? Why do we kill people's sons or stamp out people groups? Why do we do that? Or why?
We all have an incentive, at least evolutionarily, to propagate our genes to the next generation.
Yeah.
And across animal species, you see things like infanticide. So when a new primate arises to the alpha position, one thing that he usually does is kills all the male infants of the group, or all the infants of the group. So that sends the female into estrus more quickly, so he can reproduce more quickly with them. But it takes competitors of his offspring out of the picture.
Yeah.
It's savage. It's savage. It's kind of the ugly math of evolution, but it's how we arrived at that. It's how we arrived at kill all the offspring of your rivals. And any trace of their cities, it kind of goes along with that. Anything that may question, my supremacy as a leader. Stalin did the same thing in atheist Russia. Anybody uncomplimentary to his regime, he had them erased from history books. He had their statues removed. He had them removed from currency, and killed them, of course, removed from the face of the earth as well. So that his ascendancy, his position, is the one that shines through.
I can't help but think of the plagues that were enacted on Egypt by God. The last one being the killing of the firstborn son. That cultural strong arm of their legacy. And so God did that, not just in that instance. God did that in other instances where they're wiping out other people groups within the territory that Israel was to claim. And then you draw the parallel, well, not only God does that, other rulers do that, and even in stories of the Bible. You have, where Jesus is born and other people are born, where, let's go with the Jesus example, where I believe it was Herod, according to the biblical legend, that a king is born here. Well, let's kill all kids, under 5 or 2 or something like that, in his territory. There's not going to be a competing person with me. So you have demonstrations biblically of God doing this, demonstrations biblically of men, characters in the Bible doing it, or even historical characters. And then, of course, you have this demonstrated through secular history. I cannot help but think that the thesis drawn in your book and what's expounded on in your first chapter even really pinpoints what is our biological heritage and how that narrative plays out in our religious stories. Last question, Hector, and I just want to ask you again, just so we can say it again at the end of this this program here. What is our biological heritage? Where do we come from?
Oh boy, well, we come from other primates, and I think it's important to point out that just because here we're focusing on the worst parts of humanity, that doesn't mean that's all that we are, because we also have an evolved legacy of the ability to show compassion and empathy, the ability to be constructive, the ability to help the weak, the ability to extend a hand to the outside group. And we have that in us as well. Just because we study this doesn't mean that's all who we are. All of that other stuff is biologically arrived at too. So that's who we are as well. And we inherit that too from our primate legacy. We're just one moment in this amazing stream of life that preceded us.
That's beautiful. All right, everybody, this is Nobody Leave Yet. This is Alpha God. The Psychology of Religious Violence and Oppression, written by Hector Garcia. You're going to want to check it out. It's on Amazon. It's in the link in the description right here. I'm going to go over to the live feed and just say hello to everybody. Nobody go anywhere. I got a last word from Aaron Raw at the end of this, so everybody hang out for a second. Trevor Lund, what's going on? Beach Price, Reverend, Heat Shield, what's up, man? If you are, man, sorry, I don't actually know who you are. So Sweet, what's going on, everybody? Happy to see you guys over there. One Card Short, that's a cool name. Smitty, what's going on? Smitty says, praise be to Lord our Chad. Maybe meant to write, praise be to Chad our Lord. I'm sure there's some conversation going on there, insider stuff. I just thought I'd say that out loud. Everybody, thank you for your attention on here. Nobody go anywhere. I got a last word from Aaron Raw. Hector, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. I will be going through the rest of your book, and with any good fortune, have you on in future shows. How about that?
I would be just delighted. Yeah.
I would love to give that content to our audience. All right, everybody, thank you for joining Fully Deconverted. If you like what you heard and you enjoy conversations like these, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to us. Let us know that we're putting out something that's useful to you. And Hector, tell everybody goodbye.
Goodbye.
We had Ted Cruz and his father who said that all atheists and homosexuals should be put in internment camps behind cyclone fencing until we go extinct, showing that he doesn't understand either homosexuality or atheism. And people have told me that if I didn't believe in God, then I'd be out raping and killing and everything just for the fun of it. And I thought, well, there's two problems. One, I don't think raping and killing people is fun. I value my interpersonal relationships. I want to be admired. I want to be respected. I want to be loved. We all want to be loved. Funny how you're loved when you go around raping and killing people. And we've seen it again and again. When they do lose their belief, do they ever run out and start raping and killing people? That never happens. What happens, conversely, is they become more tolerant. They become more inquisitive than they've ever been.